So the different types of surveys, cross-sectional surveys, so these are surveys done at just one point in time. So many of the surveys that we're going to be doing for our theses and projects are just a snapshot of something that is going on right now. The census is another example of, something that is valid at that time. There are also large studies that do longitudinal surveys. So for example, a lot of long-term health studies like the Harvard Health Study, the Nurses Health Study, what they do is they will repeatedly sample the same people over time. So that is called a panel study. When they get yearly questionnaires, they send them in. Cohort studies would be the same population, but not necessarily the same people. So say if we wanted to survey all graduate students at Winthrop University, we'll do the survey every year, but it's all graduate students, but it's not necessarily the same people participating. Whereas the panel study is the same population, the exact same participants contacted year after year. So there are many really good studies and epidemiological studies that take place in panel studies. The important thing with any survey is you want a representative sample. And sometimes that's even more important than the size, because you have to be able to generalize. So for example, if we wanted to do a survey of Winthrop students, we wanted to make sure that we have, 2/3 females, 1/3 males that represent the student body. Or if you wanted to look at the demographics of a certain group that follow a sport, how many female fans to male fans, and what are the different age groups? Can you remember with the NASCAR survey that we worked with in class? She had to find out what were all the different demographic groups, and so her data needed to reflect that. Stratified random sampling, again, we've talked about that as well, that, sometimes you want to make sure that you're going to have to cut people off, and that, how are you going to get people from all these different groups? Like, how are you going to recruit people with lesser education? If you have a study sample and everybody is, college educated or higher, that may not be meaningful for what you want. You probably want to have a variety of people with lesser education. So where do you get your samples? Get, athletic teams, listservs, mailing lists, online ads. For one of our church studies from Virginia Tech, we did online ads and Google paid ads, and it was really pretty expensive because you have to pay per click. So even though it might be a couple pennies per click, so even if someone clicks on the ad but they never do the survey, you still have to pay for it. So, and print ads are really expensive. So to advertise in something like a journal, a newspaper, the entertainment weeklies like Creative Loafing, it's going to cost a lot to do that. And we've talked about this, about margin of error. So it's based on sort of a standard deviation. So we gave the example, say if you wanted to look at a political campaign, say, Governor Haley versus who's ever going to end up running against her, what is the margin of error? So if it says that she has 50% and the opponent has 47%, but the margin of error is 4%, their differences are within the margin of error. So it's just like saying there's no statistical difference. But if she had 50% and the opponent had 44% and the margin of error was 4, then yes, that is a meaningful difference. So it's important to understand, especially when you start to talk about things like political polls, what does margin of error mean and how is it used? Sample size, as we've talked about, you need adequate representation. It can take a lot of time to get the people that you want. If you have to have things printed in hard copy, are you going to have to get things back? Do you have to pay return postage? Like what we did with our church study from Virginia Tech, we had a lot of postage paid business reply envelopes, and even still it was hard sometimes to get the surveys back. You want to be able to see if you're looking at differences over time. Can you look at, do you have enough people left at the end of the study so that you can evaluate and perform your statistics on them? Consider the type 1 and type 2 errors, measurement error, and sample size. There are online calculators for how much you want to, how much differences do you want to see at the end, and what type of sample size are you going to need, which is important if you're doing pre, post, and follow-up. You want to be sure that you have enough people left at follow-up so that you can actually run your data analysis.